What if the biggest challenge in your life isn't something outside of you, but something within? That's the starting point of The Mountain Is You by Brianna Wiest. At first glance, the title sounds poetic, even mysterious, but the message is anything but vague. It's direct, confronting, and deeply personal. The mountain is you. The obstacles we face, feeling stuck, overwhelmed, self-critical, aren't always because the world is too hard or the people around us aren't supportive. They often come from inside, from our own unhealed pain, our own limiting beliefs, our own fear of what might happen if we actually get what we want. Wiest calls this self-sabotage, and she doesn't mean it in a judgmental way. She defines self-sabotage as what happens when the conscious mind and the subconscious mind want different things. Your conscious mind says, I want to be healthy, I want to feel happy, I want to start fresh. But your subconscious mind says, that's unfamiliar, that's risky, that's not who I've been. And so you stall, you overthink, you repeat old patterns, even if those patterns keep you stuck. Wiest argues that self-sabotage isn't a sign of laziness or lack of discipline. It's a defense mechanism. It's a form of self-protection that's out of sync with your current reality. And until you understand what it's protecting you from, you can't change it. So what does this mountain look like in everyday life? Sometimes it's procrastination. You keep putting things off, not because you don't care, but because success feels scary. Other times, it's perfectionism. You never start because you're afraid of doing it wrong. It might be toxic relationships you can't walk away from, or opportunities you quietly reject before they can reject you. And it's not just about habits, it's about identity. You might say you want a new chapter, but deep down, you're still seeing yourself through an old lens. Wiest explains that transformation isn't just changing your actions, it's changing your relationship with yourself. You have to believe you're allowed to grow, that you don't owe your future to your past. This is where many of us get stuck. We want better, but we're afraid of what better might require. New boundaries, new versions of success, a new sense of self. That means stepping into the unknown. And our nervous system doesn't always like the unknown. That's why Wiest encourages us to stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What is this pain trying to tell me?" Because your sabotage is not random. It's a map. It shows you exactly where your wounds are. For example, if you always end relationships the moment they get serious, maybe you're not afraid of love. You're afraid of being abandoned. If you never launch that idea you've been dreaming about, maybe you're not unmotivated. You're afraid of being seen and criticized. If you avoid rest and constantly overwork, maybe you're not productive. You're afraid of being worthless without output. Every pattern has a story, every behavior has a root, and your job, the first step in this journey, is to get honest about what your mountain is made of. Wiest says the mountain is a mirror. It reflects what's going on inside you, not to shame you, but to show you the truth. Because here's the core message of this book. You are not just the climber, you are the mountain, and that means you are also the solution. This is not a call to blame yourself, it's a call to empower yourself. Because if you created these patterns, you also have the power to reshape them, piece by piece, day by day. And no, it won't happen overnight. The mountain wasn't built in a day, neither is the climb. But every time you stop to reflect instead of react, you chip away at it. Every time you choose a new response, set a boundary, or speak kindly to yourself, you climb a little higher. Healing isn't a single moment, it's a million quiet choices. And Wiest makes one thing very clear. You don't heal by forcing yourself forward. You heal by understanding why you're stuck in the first place. You heal by listening. To the fear, to the resistance, to the version of you that's still holding on to survival mode. Because that version of you isn't your enemy, it's just scared. It learned certain lessons, maybe a long time ago, and it's been trying to protect you ever since. But you've changed. And now, it's time to update the story. This is the real mountain. The internal shift. The quiet rebellion against fear. The decision to stop seeing your past as a prison and start using it as a teacher. Wiest doesn't give you a step-by-step shortcut. She invites you into a process of transformation, one that begins with awareness and ends with self-trust. So if you've ever felt like you're standing in your own way, if you've ever felt torn between who you are and who you want to become, know this: there is nothing wrong with you. You are not broken. You are becoming. And the climb ahead? It's not punishment. It's purpose. Now that we've seen the mountain, let's look at what's underneath it. If the mountain is built from fear, habits, and emotional blocks, where did those come from? This is where Brianna Wiest takes us into the real work, uncovering the root causes of self-sabotage. Because self-sabotage doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not a random glitch in your personality. It's a survival strategy, a deeply intelligent response to past experiences. Here's the truth. We sabotage when our inner world doesn't feel safe enough for success, love, peace, or visibility. And most of the time, we're not even aware that's happening. Wiest explains that self-sabotage often begins in childhood, not always from big trauma, but sometimes from subtle, repeated messages we internalize. Like, you have to earn love. You're too much. It's not safe to stand out. If you fail, you'll be rejected. Don't get your hopes up. These beliefs sink into the subconscious. And even when we grow up and want more for ourselves, those old programs are still running in the background. So we hit a goal and immediately feel anxious. We get close to someone and start picking fights. We start a habit and sabotage it just before it sticks. Not because we're weak, but because our subconscious believes we're in danger. Wiest says, we sabotage ourselves when we fear success more than failure, love more than loneliness, change more than staying stuck. It's not about comfort. It's about familiarity. The brain prefers what it knows, even if what it knows is pain. This is why repeating toxic cycles can feel easier than creating new ones, because we've built an identity around struggle, and letting that go feels like stepping into the unknown. So, what can we do? First, we have to get honest. Not dramatic, not shameful, just honest. Ask yourself, what patterns keep repeating in my life? What do I fear would happen if I broke those patterns? What version of me benefits from staying stuck? These questions can be uncomfortable, but they're necessary, because you can't heal what you won't face. Wiest points out that many people think their problem is lack of motivation or willpower. But more often, it's emotional misalignment. Your inner world isn't aligned with your outer goals. Let's take an example. You say you want to build confidence. You try speaking up more. But suddenly, you feel exhausted, anxious, disconnected. You shrink back. Why? Because maybe your body still remembers the first time you spoke up and were punished or embarrassed for it. So even though your conscious mind is trying to grow, your subconscious is saying, no, we've been hurt here before. This is called emotional imprinting, and Wiest says it plays a huge role in how we navigate adulthood. We don't just respond to life, we respond to what life reminds us of. So part of the healing process is learning to recognize these triggers and say, this reaction is from my past, but I don't live there anymore. And slowly, with practice, you create space between the trigger and the response. That's where transformation begins. Another important point, not all sabotage looks dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. It's the voice that says, I'll start next week. The feeling of discomfort when things are going well. The urge to pick a fight when intimacy grows. The pull toward chaos when life gets too calm. It's easy to overlook these signs, but they're powerful clues. Wiest reminds us that if we truly want to stop sabotaging ourselves, we have to create emotional safety for growth. This doesn't mean pretending everything's okay. It means building trust with ourselves, saying, even if this is hard, I'm not abandoning myself. Saying, I can feel fear and still take action. Saying, my past does not control my future. That's emotional safety. And it's the foundation for any lasting change. You might be thinking, but what if I've been stuck for years? What if I've tried and failed too many times? Wiest speaks directly to that fear. You are not starting over, you are starting from experience. Everything you've lived through, every setback, every low point, has taught you something. And now, It's not about fixing yourself. It's about meeting yourself with compassion. The next time you notice a self-sabotaging thought or pattern, don't panic. Don't attack yourself. Instead, pause. Breathe. Ask, what is this trying to protect me from? That single question can shift everything, because when you stop fighting your patterns and start understanding them, you take your power back. And little by little, the mountain begins to soften. Wiest doesn't promise quick fixes. She invites you to do the work of gentle excavation, to go beneath the symptoms and touch the roots, to meet the younger parts of yourself who are still scared and show them a new way. This is the hard part of the climb, the part that feels heavy, uncertain, even painful. But it's also the part that holds your freedom, because when you stop fearing your own emotions, when you stop running from your past, you become grounded, clear, unshakable. And the mountain, it doesn't disappear, but it stops being your enemy. It becomes a place you rise from. Once you understand what your mountain is made of, old wounds, fear, limiting beliefs, the next step isn't pushing harder. It's rewiring yourself. That means updating your inner system, not just to think differently, but to become someone new. Someone who no longer lives in fear, but in truth. Someone who no longer waits for safety, but creates it from within. Brianna Wiest says that your entire life is built from your beliefs. And if you want to change your life, you have to start at the level of belief, especially the ones you don't even realize you have. Most of us walk around thinking we have free will, but the truth is, we're often just acting out emotional patterns we absorbed years ago. We're reacting to life, not consciously responding to it. Wiest explains that we form an identity based on what we've repeatedly experienced. If you were praised for being quiet and helpful, maybe you learned to stay small and invisible to be loved. If you were criticized for speaking up or taking space, maybe you learned to shrink yourself. These aren't choices, they're survival strategies. But what helped you survive isn't always what helps you thrive. That's why the next phase of transformation is about conscious reprogramming, not just fixing behaviors, but reshaping the blueprint behind them. Here's how Wiest breaks it down. 1. Awareness first. You can't rewire what you don't recognize. So the first step is to notice your patterns in the moment. Not just after things fall apart, but as they're happening. Ask yourself, what belief is driving this behavior? What story am I telling myself right now? Who taught me this? And is it still true? It sounds simple, but this awareness is powerful. Because every time you become the observer instead of the reactor, you weaken the old wiring. You interrupt the pattern, and interruption is the beginning of change. 2. Challenge the narrative. Wiest says that a huge part of healing is realizing you don't have to believe everything you think. You can learn to question the voice in your head. You can ask, is this voice helping me or harming me? For example, if the voice says, you'll never get it right, counter with, what if this time I do? If it says, you're not good enough, ask, says who? If it says, it's too late, remind yourself, growth doesn't have an expiration date. This isn't about lying to yourself. It's about speaking to yourself the way you would speak to someone you love. That's how you start becoming a safe place for your own growth. Third shift, your identity. Real change doesn't stick when you only focus on actions. You have to become the kind of person who naturally takes those actions. Wiest suggests this simple but profound shift. Stop saying, I'm trying to change. Start saying, this is who I am now. Instead of, I'm trying to be healthy, say, I'm a person who prioritizes health. Instead of, I want to stop overthinking, say, I'm someone who trusts their choices. Your brain loves consistency. When you start identifying as your future self, your actions begin to align. This doesn't mean you fake it. It means you practice being it until it feels real. Because the brain doesn't change through information. It changes through repetition. 4. Anchor the new you with small proof. Wiest emphasizes that transformation isn't about huge leaps. It's about stacking small wins until your system starts to trust the new path. Let's say you want to stop avoiding hard conversations. Your first win might be speaking up once, just one line, then another, then another. Each time, your nervous system learns, we survived. We can handle this. Or maybe you want to stop procrastinating. Start by doing just 5 minutes of the task, then walk away. You're not building a new life in a day. You're building evidence. Over time, these tiny proofs add up, and the brain starts believing, maybe this version of me is real. 5. Let go of the old self. This might be the hardest part. Not the doing, but the releasing. West reminds us that every time you change, you grieve a little. Even if that version of you was in pain, it was still you. You knew how to be that person. You wore their story like a second skin. But growth means letting go. Of the story that says you're not capable. Of the belief that you're too broken to be loved. Of the identity that made you feel safe but kept you small. This isn't betrayal. It's evolution. 6. Visualize the future you. Your brain doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality. So Wiest suggests using that to your advantage. Spend time every day imagining the version of you who has already climbed the mountain. What do they believe? How do they speak? How do they move through the world? This isn't just a feel-good exercise. It's training your brain to expect and accept the new reality. And the more you can feel it, the more naturally you'll act in alignment with it. By now, you might be thinking, this is hard. And you're right. Rewiring your life isn't easy. But here's the secret. It's not supposed to be. Discomfort isn't a sign you're failing. It's a sign you're shifting. Wiest writes that the path to healing often feels like grief. You'll feel resistance, exhaustion, doubt. But that doesn't mean stop. It means keep going. Because the more you meet yourself with compassion, the faster the old wiring begins to dissolve. And one day, without even noticing, you'll realize you've outgrown the mountain. By now, you understand the mountain. You know it's built from emotional pain, limiting beliefs, and old patterns. You've started to rewire your mind, challenge your thoughts, shift your identity, build new beliefs. But insight alone isn't enough. Transformation doesn't just happen in the mind. It happens in the actions you take every single day. In this part of the journey, Brianna Wiest focuses on aligned action, choices that match the healed version of you, not the wounded one. Because healing is not just emotional, it's behavioral. If you want your life to change, your habits, boundaries, and decisions have to change too. That's how healing becomes reality, not just reflection. 1. Start with the smallest possible step. We often believe that transformation has to look dramatic, like quitting everything and starting over. But Wiest reminds us that real change is quiet. It begins with the smallest possible step taken with full intention. Want to be someone who trusts themselves? Start by keeping one promise to yourself today. Not 10, just one. Want to stop people-pleasing? Start by saying no, one time. Feel the discomfort. Let it pass. And notice, you survived. Want to heal your body? Start by making one nourishing choice. Not a perfect routine, just one act of care. The ego wants instant results, but the nervous system wants safety and consistency. So the real magic happens in the micro choices. And as Wiest says, you don't need to change your whole life. You need to change your response to what's in front of you. 2. Redefine discipline as self-respect. Most people think discipline is harsh, but Wiest redefines it completely. Discipline is devotion. It's not punishment. It's how you prove to yourself that you're trustworthy. When you follow through on what you said you'd do, your subconscious begins to relax. It starts to believe, we're safe now. We're showing up for ourselves. Discipline doesn't have to mean working harder or longer. It can be about rest. It can be about boundaries. It can be about not checking your phone first thing in the morning. Discipline, at its core, is honoring your highest self over your temporary urges, and that is one of the purest forms of healing. 3. Set boundaries, even if it feels uncomfortable. One of the biggest shifts you'll face as you climb your mountain is how you relate to others. Old versions of you may have tolerated disrespect, overextension, and emotional labor because you didn't know you were allowed to say no, because deep down, you were afraid of being abandoned, judged, or unloved. But Wiest says that boundaries are not about pushing people away. They're about protecting your alignment. And yes, setting boundaries might disappoint some people, but betraying yourself to avoid that disappointment will cost you far more in the long run. Healthy boundaries sound like, "I'm not available for that. That doesn't work for me anymore. I need some time to myself. I still care about you, but I have to protect my energy." Every time you set a boundary, you send a message to your nervous system. I'm safe. I'm allowed to exist. I don't have to shrink to be loved. 4. Understand that discomfort is part of growth. Wiest says one of the biggest reasons people sabotage their healing is because they think it's supposed to feel good all the time. But growth is inherently uncomfortable because you're doing things your old self never dared to do. You're holding new boundaries. You're facing new fears. You're letting go of stories you've carried your whole life. That's not easy. That's brave. So when discomfort arises, don't panic. Don't make it mean you're doing something wrong. Make it mean you're on the right path. Wiest writes, "The pain of growth is the pain of becoming more conscious, more alive, more aligned." This is the paradox. It feels hard because it's working. 5. Learn to trust yourself again. When you've spent years abandoning your needs, ignoring your intuition, or people-pleasing your way through life, trusting yourself doesn't come naturally. But without self-trust, transformation can't last. Because no matter how much you change on the outside, you'll still be seeking validation or direction from others. So how do you rebuild self-trust? Start by listening to your inner voice. Not the voice of fear, but the quiet voice underneath it. The one that whispers when something isn't right. The one that nudges you when something is. Make space to hear that voice. Then, take small actions based on what it says. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to show your system, "I'm listening now." With each aligned decision, you grow your confidence. And confidence is not the absence of doubt. It's the result of proving to yourself that you will show up, even when it's hard. 6. Honor the in-between. Wiest calls attention to the most overlooked part of transformation, the in-between phase. The part where you've left the old version of you, but you haven't fully become the new one yet. This space can feel uncertain, confusing, and vulnerable, but it's necessary. It's where integration happens, where your mind catches up to your body, where you rest, reflect, regroup. Pause before the next rise. Let yourself be in the middle, knowing it won't last forever. This too is part of the climb. Healing isn't always beautiful. It's gritty, raw, ordinary, but it is also the most empowering thing you will ever do. Because with every aligned action, you're rewriting your story. You're choosing intention over reaction, clarity over chaos, truth over comfort. You're proving to yourself day by day, "I am no longer who I used to be." And that is what real transformation looks like. You've faced the mountain, you've studied its roots, rewired your patterns, and taken real action toward change. But there's one final step left, one that isn't about doing more, but about becoming more. This is the part of the journey Brianna Wiest calls integration. You are no longer just someone climbing the mountain. You've become the mountain, strong, grounded, steady. Not because everything in your life is perfect, but because you are no longer running from yourself. What does it mean to become the mountain? Wiest says that healing doesn't mean you'll never feel fear or pain again. It means you stop abandoning yourself in the face of it. It means you trust your reactions. You hold space for your emotions. You move through life with awareness, instead of reacting from old wounds. You no longer live in survival mode. You live in self-leadership. Becoming the mountain means you are no longer triggered by the same things. You still notice the discomfort, but you respond with clarity. You still have doubts, but you act anyway. You still feel pain, but you don't collapse under it. That is the power of integration. 1. You no longer see yourself as broken. One of the most beautiful outcomes of true healing is that you stop seeing yourself as a problem to fix. You see yourself as a person to know, to love, and to guide. You accept that your emotions aren't evidence of failure, they're feedback. You understand that your triggers are not shameful, they're signposts. You realize that nothing was ever wrong with you. You were always responding to the tools and circumstances you had. Now, with more awareness, you can respond differently. But that doesn't make the past version of you wrong. It makes them human. Wiest writes, "The goal is not to become a perfect person. The goal is to become a whole one." 2. You become comfortable with uncertainty. Before, uncertainty might have sent you into panic or avoidance. Now you can sit with it. You've learned to befriend the unknown, to breathe through discomfort, to trust that clarity comes not from controlling everything, but from staying grounded through everything. This is one of the clearest signs that you've done deep emotional work. You no longer need to predict the outcome to feel safe. You trust yourself to handle whatever comes, because you've done it before. 3. You move from reaction to response. Old patterns are fast. They fire off like instincts, snap judgments, quick exits, shutting down. But when you've climbed your mountain, those patterns slow down. You create space between trigger and action. And in that space, you make a choice. This is where your power lives, not in being perfect, but in being present. You stop lashing out. You stop spiraling. You stop self-sabotaging the second you feel discomfort. Instead, you pause. You breathe. You choose again. That is integration in motion. 4. You hold duality without breaking. Life is never all one thing. It's joy and grief, expansion and loss, love and fear. Becoming the mountain means you can hold both. You can be healing and still hurting. You can feel scared and still take the leap. You can be proud of how far you've come and still want more. This emotional flexibility is part of what makes you resilient. You're no longer shaken by contradiction. You're anchored by self-trust. Wiest reminds us, true peace is not found in perfection. It's found in the ability to remain rooted through the storm. 5. You live with intention, not instinct. You wake up and choose your thoughts, your energy, your presence. You no longer let the day drag you into autopilot. You ask, how do I want to feel today? What do I need right now? What does my highest self require from me? You stop chasing validation. You stop comparing yourself. You start leading yourself. This shift is subtle but powerful, because you're not just reacting to life anymore. You're creating it. 6. You understand that the work never ends, but you're not afraid of it. This is perhaps the most grounded truth in The Mountain Is You. Healing isn't a finish line, it's a lifestyle. There will always be new layers to uncover, new wounds to tend, new versions of yourself to meet. But you're no longer intimidated by that. Because you know the rhythm now. Pause, reflect, realign. You've done the work once, and you know you can do it again. What once felt like a mountain now feels like a path. One you can walk with strength, clarity, and grace. Final reflection. Wiest doesn't promise a perfect life on the other side of the climb, but she offers something better: self-ownership. You stop waiting for external permission. You stop outsourcing your power. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. Instead, you rise. You lead. You hold space for yourself in every room you enter. You don't need to be loud. You don't need to prove anything. You simply are whole, steady, grounded. That is what it means to become the mountain. Because in the end, the climb wasn't about conquering something outside of you. It was about meeting the real you, the one who was always there beneath the pain, the fear, and the stories. And now that you've met her, you'll never go back.